Hey, good people. Sammy Ashe here, Executive Director of the Ashe Academy, and your host of our Inspire, Uplift, Engage podcast. Our Spring Collection Contest is going strong. Follow the hashtag Spring Collection Contest to see the contestants and show them some love with your likes. May 10th, my birthday, we'll be going live on Instagram at 1:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to announce the winners and reveal the new items in our store. Plus, to make things fun, we'll be doing a little merch giveaway. To find out how to win, all you have to do is join me for my birthday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Follow at the Ashe Academy on IG and tune in to enter to win. It might involve some trivia, so stay ready so you won't have to get ready. All right, let's get started with the show. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Ashe Academy's Inspire, Uplift, Engage podcast. I am Sammy Ashe, the Executive Director of the Ashe Academy, and today we are joined by Joyce Zhang Gray, co-founder and CEO of Alariss. Let me get that right. Global expansion tech startup. I like to put in the mistakes, Joyce. I just want I want you to know that I like to put those in. I mess up sometimes, and it's okay. But thank you so much for joining us. You have an illustrious career that we would love to jump into. So let's get started. How did you get into tech?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Sammy. It's really a privilege, and I'm so excited to talk to everyone, especially because representation in tech is such an important topic. And
Absolutely.
I think that I didn't really even know what tech meant. And I suppose when I was in college, it wasn't really as big of a sector as it is now. People weren't going into jobs in tech in particular. I had the privilege of studying at Harvard, but it's a liberal arts college, and there was a lot more emphasis on I suppose I studied government and economics, and so I wasn't really on that path. But perhaps the first time I really got a chance to know that tech existed, I remember even in high school, because my mom's actually a database administrator, and databases are very important. She worked for Wayne State University in Detroit, so she kind of told me about websites and HTML. I wasn't really that interested in it because I kind of liked words and writing a lot more than coding, even though now, knowing what I know, I wish I had been perhaps a bit more diligent when she was trying to get me to be interested about databases and the work that she did. So I was very lucky, though, to have that early exposure, and a mother who is technical. And then when I was in college, one of the first chances I got to work at a tech startup was actually an education technology startup my sophomore year, which was called Batik. And it was a startup where people were using webcams to help mentor kids in Korea. And it was a lot of volunteers from different universities in the US using webcams. And this was really early. I mean, this was like 2007. And so Zoom wasn't around. The technology was quite bad, really grainy,
I was
a lot
about
of
to
bad
say, I
design.
feel like back then it was not good.
Yeah, so we had to use these Logitech cameras that were external, plugged into a USB in our, ThinkPad IBM computers, which were the standard issue college computers. This was a time when Facebook was just starting, and it was only basically it was just like a school directory more than anything else. It didn't have all the features it has now, so it was just a really different time. But it was already exciting because through technology, I found, wow, you can connect with someone on the other side of the world and have a relationship with them and talk to them as if they were in the room with you. And this was quite novel, again, because it was still relatively new. I even remember watching an episode of The Simpsons, maybe when I was a kid or something, where they showed this like strange futuristic world where people could turn on their TV, and instead of watching TV, it was like family members they were talking to, and people thought that was so weird. But it just goes to show how quickly technology changes, and now FaceTime, Zoom, all these things is just so commonplace. And I studied government and economics, like I said, in school. Afterwards, I worked for the Federal Reserve during the financial crisis, worked on financial regulatory reform policy. And after that, I was actually about to go to grad school for public policy, but on a whim, I kind of thought, I've always wanted to explore my roots, my heritage, because I'm Chinese American. I was born in the US. My parents immigrated, and I'd never gotten a chance to actually work overseas. So maybe it would be a good chance, to hold off grad school for a year and just test out working in Asia and maybe leveraging my bilingualism and trying to figure out this brave new world. And I was lucky enough to get recruited by a tech company. So Groupon, which is based in Chicago, but had offices all around the world and was doing global expansion very quickly, recruited me to go move to China. And that was really eye-opening for me, because at that point, this was, over a decade ago, China's technology scene was not as robust as it is now, but the things were growing, things were changing. WeChat was just introduced. A lot of these, online e-commerce marketplaces like Alibaba were really starting to take off. And there was so much happening in the country and so much energy. So I found that really inspiring. And it's something that's continued to inform my career, and in many ways why Alariss, which is also a global expansion marketplace, now goes in the reverse direction, kind of enabling a lot of these tech companies in the emerging markets to expand and localize in the US, because in the past it was American tech companies going overseas, but now we see this true brain circulation and global trends of happening of just knowledge sharing, and I think it wouldn't have been possible were it not for the advancement of technology. So that's kind of a little bit about my own journey of how I found myself in tech, but a lot of it really stems from this true desire to connect people in different countries and different cultures, because that's just so much of my own personal experience as a second generation immigrant growing up in the US.
That's amazing. And I feel like, like just starting out from what you said, like not knowing what tech was and kind of finding a purpose within it, is super important. Like, as much as technology is like this inanimate thing, if you can humanize it or humanize the function of whatever you're doing with it, then it means more to people. Exactly why I told people, like, I didn't care for stats or analytics until I got to grad school, and I was like, oh, when you apply these numbers, then they mean things. Okay, like, oh, when I was learning how to code, I was like, oh, when we're actually on a live website and I'm manipulating things, that means something to me. Like, people get to interact with what I'm creating. Meant nothing to me years ago, and I was just like, okay, this I don't like this. So throughout your own journey, did you have any teachers or professors along the way that were like guiding you through? I know you had the early on access to it through your mom, just with databases. So along the way, did you have any teachers or professors who kind of guided you into the tech direction? Because as you said, you first of all may not have known explicitly what tech was, and you did have access to database like information, or as a realm through your mom, um, but not studying it. Did you have any teachers or professors that were like, hey, this could be an avenue that could get you into tech, or was it your own journey that led you there?
I think I was very lucky to have really wonderful mentors and teachers and professors who encouraged me to explore my aspirations and sort of my curiosity. So it wasn't as prescriptive as you should go into tech per se, but I think like a just a really good teacher or mentor is someone who enables you or empowers you to do whatever it is that would make you happy, make you successful, make you want to be a good contributor to society. And when I think back, like one of in terms of tech, one of my first tech mentors, I guess, was the then head of Microsoft Asia Pacific, Tracy Fellows, who for me was really a great role model, because she was one of the top, if not one of the top ranking female executives at Microsoft, area vice president of Asia Pacific, like I said. And to be a woman in tech, especially at that level, was difficult, and it still is. There aren't a lot of women who ascend to that height. And I think I also realized that, tech doesn't have to be as daunting as people think. Like, you don't need to be kind of, that superhuman supercomputer in your brain, coder, actually working in tech. I'm not particularly technical. I know enough about it to be able to function in that, run a company that's in the tech space or function in that role, but I'm not the engineer. I'm the one who's working with them to kind of get feedback from customers, to help, scope out perhaps product roadmaps, and also to help sell the product essentially to our customers. And there are different functions and different roles that people can play in tech. But I'm just really grateful that, of course, a lot of my professors were just really supportive of what I wanted to do. And it just so happens that right now tech is booming. Obviously, when I was at Stanford for business school, it's in Silicon Valley. So there were a lot of classes specific to launching a tech venture, or building your minimum viable product and things like that. So there was a very different ethos there. But earlier on in my career, it was just that ability to feel supported and to take risks and to go into new fields that were cutting edge without having to worry too much, because you have a great support network that's there for you. And even if my career path looked different from their career path, it didn't matter, because tech was this generation's, let's say, investment banking from 3 decades ago.
Awesome, awesome. So how did Alariss come to be? Like when were you like, I need to co-found this, or this needs to be a thing?
I think in many ways, I've always felt the need for something like Alariss. We call ourselves a global expansion marketplace. And really, our dual mission is to connect people across borders virtually, through work collaboration that will be a win-win. So in emerging markets, Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, there's a boom in the tech industry. There's a lot of capital, and there's a lot of great entrepreneurs, but actually they're getting bottlenecked in their growth because they don't have enough talent locally, and they want to spread out all over the world. And then in the US, in certain markets, they have a lot of really, really great talent, and that talent's looking for unique ways to be able to have impact. And so we seek to connect those two sides. And again, now that the work can be done virtually, if you think about it, we've been outsourcing, to India or Vietnam or the Philippines, and working remotely with people there in a way for many, many years. But now the reverse outsourcing, I guess, is happening, where people in those countries can also hire Americans to do really high skilled work, in particular in sales and business development. So I think I've always really cared about building bridges and connections, like I alluded to earlier. The fact that I was a second generation immigrant and grew up with family in China and speaking another language gave me empathy for understanding what other people are thinking and how much they crave these interactions and these collaborations. And so I suppose ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to be that bridge, whether it's like translating on behalf of my family or trying to help people out when they're going abroad and don't know anyone. And it just kind of became more solidified once I was working in Silicon Valley, working at a tech startup, and seeing how it was done, and feeling inspired to just, strike out and take a risk and do it myself with one of my best friends from college.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, I always say this, I'm in full support of people having different, educational paths, but the relationships I built in college are just invaluable. Even if it was senior year, and I'm shouting out the theater department at City College of New York right now, I met people like right about to graduate, and I'm still very close to them. Let's not say how many years later, but you guys know how many years it's been. But no, that's beautiful that it was best friend in college, and then now you are, CEO of an impactful company. That's great. So you've kind of alluded to it. What does representation look like in your industry for you? And do you feel represented?
Well, I think that for at least for our own company, we're really proud that though our team is small, we make sure to have a very diverse, a very diverse team. Over 80% would self-identify as LGBTQ plus and or a person of color. And this question of why does representation matter? I mean, it matters so much on so many different levels. If we were to just look at business outcomes, there are a lot of studies that show companies with women in the C-suite tend to perform many times better. Publicly listed companies tend to perform many times better when it comes to just, their financials and their revenue, et cetera. Companies with diverse boards, or companies with just a diverse team of different, ethnicities, races, religions, sexual orientations, they just perform better. And it also leads to a lot of psychological security, which is really important for well-functioning teams. If the company has people who feel like they're valued and feel like it's an inclusive and diverse environment. So there's, of course, the business element. There's also, the society or social benefit, which is, we live in a really diverse country and an increasingly diverse world, of course. And so having that representation, having role models and leaders that young people can look up to and say, I could be like them one day, that's very inspiring. Whereas it can feel really alienating if a young person looks at the, C-suite of a company that they just joined and realize nobody in that executive team looks like them. So that becomes a challenge for the company to recruit and retain good talent if a lot of the talent churns because they just don't feel like, it's worth it that they'll ever get to that point. So I think a lot of those things really matter. To your other question of, do I feel represented? I suppose both yes and no. There are some really great leaders in tech who are people of color, but at the same time, there's still a big gap. We have a long way to go. And there are lots of challenges. People talk about the pipeline issue. People talk about things like, systemic racism. They talk about people who just sort of opt out and remove themselves kind of from the running for a variety of reasons. There are studies that show that during COVID, it's disproportionately impacted women and people of color when it comes to job loss and people who choose to leave the workforce because maybe a lot of the family responsibilities might fall to them. So I think there are a lot of structural issues still in American society that needs to be addressed. And I think a lot of private companies do have a responsibility to address it, especially those that are so well capitalized. Like the technology sector has grown immensely, and companies like Amazon or Google and Facebook and Zoom have really, I would say, benefited from the pandemic because so much has gone online, and those companies are really well positioned to make a big impact. And speaking of representation, Zoom has the CEO and founder of Zoom is an Asian American, Eric Yuan. So I think he's a really great example of a role model and of someone who I think is really inspiring, both because of where he's come from, how hard he had to work, and also just his ethos around being very being very people-centric, people first. The statements he's released on behalf of the company in support of Black Lives Matter, in support of anti-racism campaigns, I think that takes a lot of leadership, and I'm very inspired by that.
Awesome. I feel like my idea of representation has grown just through this whole podcast of like, no one's ever going to check all the boxes of my complete identity. So like, it's like, give up on someone that looks exactly like and speaks exactly like and has the exact background as Sammy, but someone who checks a few boxes that I can say, okay, I look up to them, or like I see myself in them. As many boxes as we can check, I appreciate it. I just would like to see more people of color in these spaces, and I'm happy for it. And just like when you said in the C-suites, I'm like, I look around, you go to that About Us page, and if there is nobody that looks remotely like you, just or no one that looks remotely like you in any management positions, it's something to just take note of. I'm not saying don't go with that organization. I'm just saying take note of the fact that that could be a barrier for you if they don't have it now. And being the pioneer is a difficult situation to be the token in many situations. Yeah. So yeah, these these little things that you just peep and you figure your life out from there. What would you say from those challenging things that I've mentioned right there would be what is the most challenging aspect of running your business?
There are lots of challenging aspects to running a business. It constantly feels, especially if you're running a startup, like that you're just trying to build the railroad tracks as the train is coming down the tracks, I suppose. But I'm really lucky to have a great team, a small but mighty team that's just been really wonderful, and everyone's so enthusiastic. I really appreciate the contributions of the team and the ability to work together on it. um, I think it's just sometimes you worry as a founder if you're doing the right things, if you kind of second guess yourself because you are trailblazing in an area that hasn't been done before. And sometimes progress seems like it's not going as quickly as you'd like. There are setbacks. And so just trying to keep a really positive attitude and trying to keep resilient, I think, is among the more challenging pieces. But again, I'm just very lucky that I have a great co-founder, really great advisors and investors, and a great team that kind of keeps me going even when the going is rough.
Awesome, awesome. What would you say kind of distinguishes a startup versus, and I don't even know myself, what is the difference between, what makes a startup a startup? I guess is the way to kind of define that for people, because I feel like I don't even have a good grasp of it, and I've worked with them before.
That's a great question. I think sometimes it's just in a mindset, really, because
Okay.
I think about entrepreneurship and it's been around forever. I mean, people who have the scrappiness to, let's say like in ancient Mesopotamia, they had the scrappiness to like pick some oranges from an orange tree and then sell it to like soldiers marching through or whatever it is, and kind of created their own little orange juice stand. I mean, I'm just making this example up. I'm not even sure if oranges are indigenous to that area. But, that person was an entrepreneur. They took on some risk. They tried to make some, they saw a market need, they tried to address it. So I think that, startups or businesses that are new come in all different shapes and forms. I have so much respect for those who do it bootstrapped and who run it a certain way or even in a physical space. But I guess what differentiates a startup, at least the way that we talk about it right now in this kind of like new tech world, is a startup is usually a company that's in its early stages, still privately owned, not yet public, might not yet be profitable, but with one day hope of getting there, has ambitions to grow very quickly. So and is usually tech enabled or has some sort of product that is a software product or is scalable beyond kind of like a professional services company where each person you have produces the output. That for a startup, or at least a tech startup, usually you're hoping that the software product is going to be helping accelerate, some of the growth of the company. So I would say those are some of the key characteristics, but again, they can come in all different shapes and sizes and be selling all sorts of different products. So there isn't a one size fits all.
Mhm. Perfect. You know what? We're expanding horizons, but the horizons start with me, because some things I ask, I'm like, I have no clue, or I don't have a good grasp of it. So, excellent. I hope that helps someone kind of like, oh, okay, well, like I wouldn't mind working with a startup, and that might be some of the reasons why people of color may avoid going into certain organizations. They just don't understand what's going on there, or like what it is, and
Definitely. This is something I feel really passionately about, which is, like I said, a startup is in a mindset. Sometimes people are doing, like, especially people of color in the US, have had to overcome extraordinary barriers in many ways. And many of them are entrepreneurs or have had to be entrepreneurs through kind of necessity.
Mhm.
And I don't think a startup has to just be, someone who comes from a wealthy family who gets some money that they get to borrow from their parents to work on a passion project. Again, I really hope that people take heart and know you can be either a startup founder or part of a startup because you have just a big dream, something that you see in the world that needs to be filled and that you are uniquely positioned to do. And, do it in a kind of tech scalable way. But everyone can be part of a startup. You don't have to go to certain schools. You don't have to wear a hoodie, although your hoodie looks really nice, Sammy. You don't have to fit a certain archetype.
Thank you. It's an Ashe Academy hoodie too.
Right. I like it. You don't have to fit a certain archetype, but I do think it's important to have that mindset to really believe in yourself And that is something that not enough people encourage, I think, those who come from less represented backgrounds to have that mindset. It's also kind of the leader mindset versus the follower mindset, because many of them have been told, you just have to keep your head down and follow what other people tell you to do. Whereas a lot of times startups are all about you need to be proactive and take initiative because there's no one to follow, or there's no script or rule book. And that can be challenging, but it usually just takes some encouragement and having, that like self-confidence, which for people, again, for people of color, I think it really is important to have that come from friends, mentors, external sources sometimes, because then they can really internalize it and believe it themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, I just want people to know, take up space wherever you are. If there's a question out there, answer it. Say, speak your mind. Um, but read the room too, because not every time I spoke did people want to hear from me. So on that note,
Well, I want to
what
hear from you, Cindy.
I appreciate it. And I want to hear from you. What is the most rewarding part of your business?
It really is the people, both the team members, the fellows we get to work with, and the clients we get to impact. It just feels so fantastic when I'm talking to someone who was part of the Alariss team or part of our fellowship program, and they let me know that they found a really great career opportunity because of us, or that we really opened up their eyes to the possibilities, or that we helped them gain self-confidence, and that it was a really meaningful and transformative experience. Like, those things really keep me going. And it's just, yeah, the human impact is what's most meaningful for me.
Awesome. All right, so this is the section that I love to ask these terrible questions. What is the worst advice you have ever received? I am sure you've received some type of guidance that you're like, doesn't feel right, or no, thank you. What can you
You know,
share
I don't
what that
think
was?
I don't think there's like advice I would characterize as worst, because everyone gives advice in a well-intentioned way. I would just say that advice that I've gotten that hasn't been really applicable for me or hasn't been relevant have been things like, you just need to find the most stable, secure job possible. And that's great advice for certain people. It wasn't advice necessarily that I wanted or needed. At some point in my career, maybe that is good advice, but that's not something I want right now. And it's important just to realize that it comes from a good place, but you have to take it with a grain of salt, because people's advice is more a reflection of themselves than it is of you sometimes. And you just want to know yourself and know what really resonates, and triangulate from the different advice you get from well-intentioned people.
Absolutely. I just want to say, on the podcast for all of our listeners, I appreciate diplomacy energy because I'm very discreet and very diplomatic. So the way you've been answering these questions is very much in the vibe that I love it.
Maybe it comes from a lifetime of sort of navigating different cultures.
Yeah, I
And
really appreciate it. I want to know that I can see it and I can recognize it. So what's some of the best advice that you received? Like, you know what, looking back, someone gave me this piece of information. I was like, oh, okay, like it worked out.
yeah, some of the great advice I've gotten is think about what you'll regret more, rather for not
Mhm.
doing, rather than just making decisions based on, think about which path will be one that you ultimately regret not having explored or taken. Another piece of advice that I thought was really powerful is people don't always remember what you tell them, but they remember how you made them feel. And I think that's incredibly important to keep in mind as well. And I guess finally, it's just, keep an open mind and be empathetic. Have approach everything like with a constant attitude of lifelong learning, because the world changes quickly, and you just want to be really flexible, because like Charles Darwin said, it's not always the strongest or the fastest that survive, but the ones who are most adaptable to change.
I mean, right when you were talking about like get a stable job, I was like, what is stability? I never like I've been through a pandemic. I I have been through the financial crisis. What part of this world has been stable for me? Uh, it's like I was in the middle of undergrad during the financial crisis, so like it's been just
Ups and downs.
we've been through a lot. So everything's risky in my in my things could change at the drop of a dime. So, um, all right, I love this question because it takes you outside of tech, it takes you outside of your business. Um, what brings you joy outside of everything that has to do with Laris? What brings you joy?
Yeah, I think I just get a lot of intrinsic joy from people. I'm really lucky to have a great family. My husband's very supportive. I have two younger brothers that I love chatting with, and we do weekly family calls where we'll do FaceTime check-ins every weekend and text each other all the time when there's random things like a movie that came out that we recommend to each other, or something that happened that we feel very strongly about, either positively or negatively. So yeah, my tribe, my the people in my life bring me joy.
It's beautiful, beautiful. I think this is the perfect time to segue into our final line of questioning, our Q&A. So, who is your biggest inspiration?
Oh gosh, there are so many people who are big inspirations in my life. I think my mother would have to be probably biggest inspiration though. As I alluded to earlier, she's always been very humble. Like she's never thought of herself, I think, as like a trailblazer per se, even though she's been working in, tech and databases for a long time, in universities. And, she immigrated to the US. She made so many sacrifices for me and my brothers. She's raised three kids, and also has taken care of her parents. So she's definitely the quintessential sandwich generation, takes care of her sisters. She has four sisters, and she's always been the one she's a middle child, but she's always been the one who's kind of like the glue for the family, planning the reunions, taking care of her younger sisters, and has always worked. Like she's never, been a stay-at-home mom. She's always also worked and juggled. Not that there's anything wrong with being a stay-at-home mom, but most people, when they hear how many responsibilities she has, they just assume her full-time role has been to take care of all these people. But she's had a job and she's been financially independent. So yeah, there are lots of things that I admire, and I hope that in the future I can be like that as well.
Awesome, awesome. Who do you hope to uplift with your work?
I hope really for any person who, especially, I suppose, of the younger generation, to uplift, especially those who feel as if they have imposter syndrome, that they would love to, let's say, go into tech or go into a risky field, but they just don't know if they have what it takes. I just want to let them know that you have what it takes. You are complete. There is no blueprint that you need to be successful. It's mostly just a mindset, and it's mostly about having confidence in yourself and going for it. So, especially for those who come from underrepresented backgrounds, I really hope that this gets through to that person, to those people, and that they can have that little bit more, a little bit more of that determination to go forward and take a risk on themselves.
Absolutely. You're not going to get me going right in the middle of the last line of questioning, but yes, yes, so much that. Um, how do you stay engaged with your motivation, or what keeps you going?
I've been lucky to be able to mentor a lot of students of color in, at the college level, and those who either they reach out through different programs, or I just come across them, or even naturally now because of Alariss, we have a lot of applicants coming through at different stages in their careers looking for meaningful roles. So it's great to just sort of be able to give back, but also to be very up to date and understand what's going on. And there are certain things that are just universal. Like I still remember what it was like to be in college or high school and have all these self doubts, and and to, like I mentioned, imposter syndrome earlier, to have massive imposter syndrome. And some of those stay the same. And then there are other things that are more, I think, generational. For example, the challenges that this generation has when it comes to virtual job searching. How do you do it? And I encourage a lot of my mentees to think of this as, this is actually a huge new opportunity. Yes, COVID and virtual recruiting does present some challenges, but it also presents unique opportunities to reach out to people that you're not encumbered by physical distance. Like you could, if you don't live in New York City, or you don't live in, let's say, Tulsa, Arizona, or wherever, you can still talk to people in those places. And you don't have to buy an expensive plane ticket or get a hotel or whatever it is, which is kind of unaffordable to some people. You can have farther reach. And it's just reframing and finding opportunities when life deals you a hand that maybe at first seems hard to work with. So yeah, that's some more advice that goes back to that whole the ethos around adaptability and flexibility. Financial crises, global pandemic, these black swan events will happen. And when they happen, you make the best of it and you keep going.
Absolutely. Everything, Joyce. Come on. I'm just gonna say it, Pastor. I appreciate it, Pastor. You're gonna get one. That's my little thing that I give people who have just shared too many gems to not acknowledge it. So what's next for you? If there's any like events that you have coming up, or are you speaking anywhere, let us know about it.
Great. Well, thank you. I mean, please do, subscribe to our Alariss Spotify podcast. We feature global leaders, and subscribe to our blog posts. We also feature content from people all around the world with perspectives on everything from international careers to how to build out like a global team. So I think it's just to continue growing the business, continue being as much of a mentor, advisor, role model, friend, peer as I can possibly be, and to be, a good person in society. Those are just my goals.
You know what? There's nothing more to say. Thank you so much. I appreciate you joining us for this. Just everything. You know what? Everyone, make sure you were listening to everything Joyce said. That's all I have to say. Everything. This was great. So once again, thank you guys for coming back again for another episode of the Ashe Academy's Inspire, Uplift, Engage podcast. This was Joyce Zhang Gray, and take care. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Sammy.